Welcome to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I have the first in the actual fabrication of my Warhammer Dwarf Ironbreaker. Now, the thing that I absolutely love about my Dwarf Helmet is that it's an amalgamation of multiple resources that I had found online. So I tried to make this my own. So I took the ears from this helmet, the profile from this helmet, the beard from this helmet, and I put them all together to create kind of my own version. And that's the thing that's awesome about cosplay, and especially doing a passion project like this, is I'm not constrained to make something perfect. I have to make this specific character. I can take those little pieces from here and here and make kind of my own version of it. And the thing that's also great about that is that just like all my other props that are out there, I have free PDF files available over my website if you would like to make one of these yourself. So you can build right along with my video, or you can take those PDF files and create your own Dwarf Helmet, or just use a lot of those tips and techniques in your own future creations. Now, this helmet is of course made all out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And again, that is a fantastic way to help support this channel, is by going through the links that are in the description section and those that are on my website, picking up some awesome HD foam, because every time you do, not only are you getting some of the best foam on the market, but it supports this channel and it allows me to continue to build awesome things like this, show you how to do it, and provide free PDF files along the way. Now, with this helmet, of course, I made a prototype beforehand, and you know, it's similar, right? I got a lot of things that are kind of mirrored between the two, but it's not exact. This was just made to get me my overall base templates and to kind of figure out size and scale. So I don't really need it at this point because I've got my final version to go off of. Now, I want to show you what it takes to put this helmet together. Let's go ahead and get started. With all my templates complete, I'm going to start by taking part A and transferring that 2 times onto some 6mm foam. I'm also going to trace and cut out part B and round over the side edges. Using some weldwood contact cement, I'm going to glue together the dart on the back side of part A. If your foam is a little stiff, you can use a heat gun to help you manipulate it just a little bit. On the template, there are 2 gray sections at the bottom of part B. This is where part A is going to be glued on, and I do that by using some Bob Smith superglue. Once these 2 sections have been glued onto part B, they are then glued together at the top, approximately 1.5 inches down. Now you can see how part B will cover up this seam and go all the way to the back of the face shield. To make sure my adhesive is exactly where it needs to be, I trace around part B. Then, using some weldwood contact cement and some superglue, I can adhere it into place. The darts at the back of part A are sanded flush with my rotary tool, and I apply a little bit of heat with my heat gun to smooth out the foam surface. Using some 6mm foam, I trace and cut out part C 2 times. These 2 sections are going to go underneath of the eyes, and you can tell from the video they're going to overlap on the front of part B. Part D is cut out of some 6mm foam. This is going to help bulk up the bridge of the nose. Part E is also cut out of some 6mm foam and glued on top. You can see how it wraps around the bridge of the nose with an eye on either side. To add some additional details to the front of the helmet and to cover up this back dart seam on part A, I'm going to add some small strips of 1mm foam. Now, if you don't have any 1mm foam, you could also use 2mm in this instance. This is a great way to give the helmet a more seamless look while getting the opportunity to add more details. Part F can now be traced and cut out of 6mm foam 2 times. Now, the swirl that's in the middle of this can be a little bit difficult to cut out, so after rounding over the edges, I then use my rotary tool to clean up that space. To smooth out the foam, I once again use my heat gun, and now remember, if you're heating up foam, make sure to wear your respirator and work in a well-ventilated area. I traced around part F before I glued it into place, that way I could make sure that it lined up perfect on either side. Part G is going to make up his eyebrows, and these 2 pieces are going to be cut out of 10mm foam. Now, I could have done the score and heat method here, and by all means you can, but I wanted a little more definition on mine, so I cut it all apart and then rounded over each section with my rotary tool. A heat gun was then used to smooth it out, and then I could glue all of those pieces back together. In the end, I feel that this method just looks a lot cleaner than if I had just done the score and heat. Now, because these are all individual sections, I cut out a small piece of 1mm foam and adhered that to the back. Each eyebrow can now be marked and glued into place, lining it up with the lower section that I glued on earlier. Part H is going to make up the section in between the eyebrows. Now, depending on the spacing on your helmet, this piece may need to be changed. Super glue is applied and adhered to the bridge of the nose, and then the upper section is glued down to Part B. Part I is going to make up a detail that runs up the length of the helmet. This is also going to be cut out of some 10mm foam. Now, I wanted it to be a little more inclusive, so I notched out a piece in Part H. I didn't include the notch in the template because on your helmet it may depend on how far Part I comes down. Just like the eyebrows, this piece is also going to be cut apart, but not before I add some bevels to the sides using my rotary tool. Each section is cut out and heat sealed before being glued back together. You could of course do the heat and score method on this part as well, but like I had mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a competition level costume, so small details like this really pay off in the end. I trace around Part I before I glue it down just to make sure that my spacing is correct on either side. Any excess foam on Part I that's hanging off the back can be trimmed away. Using a hole punch, I remove Part J from some 6mm foam. A rotary tool is used to round over the top, but not completely because I still want it to have that hand-forged look. Using an even smaller hole punch, I'm now able to glue tiny faux rivets all around Part H. These small rivets were cut out of 2mm foam. If you don't have a hole punch like this, you can either use a leather punch, a copper pipe, or just cut them out by hand. Part K and Part L were cut out using my circle jig, but if you don't have a bandsaw, you can transfer these templates onto the foam as well. The details for Part M were drawn onto some tracing paper. I then took a large graphite pencil and colored on the back. By drawing on the front of this tracing paper, it transfers the image onto some 4mm foam. These sections can now be individually cut out and glued onto Part L. For his beard, I am going to do the score and heat method here, just because the detail is so small. Using a hobby knife, I lightly score the foam, and then once heat is applied, the foam opens up. A strip of 4mm foam, approximately a half an inch by 10 inches, is then cut out. This small detail will cover up all the seams on the sides. A light heat treatment to the overall piece, and now Part L can be glued down to Part K. Now I can start fabricating the back of the helmet, and it's going to be comprised of parts N and O, and both of these are going to be made out of 6mm foam. Just like Part A, contact cement is applied to the darts, and then the pieces can be firmly pressed together. Once the adhesives have cured, Part O and Part N can now be attached together. Now the two halves can be glued together, giving us the back curve to the helmet. Sometimes the seams on the interior are a little bit better, so if that's the case, go ahead and flip this piece inside out. Just like Part A, I also sanded all of these seams and then hit it with a heat gun to smooth it out. Once I know approximately where I want this piece to go, I can then mark the interior of the helmet with a pencil. Now, as I had done with the front, I'm once again going to cover up these seams using some small strips of 1mm foam. Adhesive is added to each one of these seams, and then a small strip of foam is glued to the top. Now the second strip in I don't really like, and I actually replace it with Part R later on. Now the back dome of the helmet can be glued into place on either side. Part P is a brim for the back of the helmet, and this piece is cut out of some 6mm foam. As you can see here, it's going to wrap all the way around the back but line up with the front of the helmet on either side. Now again, for your helmet, you may need to change the size of this piece so it fits properly. The top of the brim can now be glued flush with the back of the helmet. Part Q is going to wrap around the top section of the helmet, and this is cut out of some 4mm foam. After removing the 1mm strips that I had glued down earlier in these areas, I can now glue this into place. Like I had said earlier, I didn't really like this particular seam cover. So I cut Part R out of some 4mm foam, glued that into place, and I think this gives it a more robust look. To mimic the details on the front, I have part S. This piece is also cut out of some 10mm foam, and I add some slight bevels to it before I cut it into individual pieces. The pieces are then glued together just like the eyebrows and the detail on the top of the helmet. This strip can now be glued down and will cover the central seam on the back. To give this helmet some additional details, I'm going to glue some small strips of 1mm foam to either side of part I and part S. For these small areas, a tongue depressor works great to help smooth out the foam and press it into place. Part K with the ear details can now be glued to either side of the helmet, also gluing down part Q to the top. For the rivets on the top, I listed it as part T on the template, and I used a hole punch to make a lot of 4mm discs. Just like part J, these were slightly rounded over on the top and then glued to the perimeter of part Q. Going back to the nose, I'm now going to glue part U in between the two sections of part C. This is going to help round out the profile of the helmet even more. Now I can take part V and cut it out of some 4mm foam and glue it to either side. The end of part V will have a slight taper and meet up with the eyebrow. It will also have a slight gap under the eye. Part W is going to be cut out of some 6mm foam. It's also going to meet up with the eyebrows and cover the seam that was created by part U. This section will also wrap all the way around the front of the face to meet up with the ear detail on the side. Part X is the nose, and it's cut out of some 6mm foam. To give this piece a slight curve, a channel is sanded out of the back. Super glue is added along with a little bit of accelerator, and the top of this piece can be pressed together. And here you can see how that small channel gives the nose a slight curve. The nostrils are part Y and made out of some 6mm foam. Disregard mine, they get changed later on. To make up the front of his beard, I'm going to take part Z and trace that onto some 10mm foam 2 times. Just like the eyebrows and the top details, these pieces were all cut out individually and sanded. This gave them a very distinct look, and then once all of them had been glued together, they could be glued to either side of the helmet. The side beard, or part AA, was also cut out of some 10mm foam. After being glued together, this piece is also glued to the side, but if you notice the front, I actually glued it slightly back. I felt this gave the helmet a little more dimension than if they had just met up perfectly. Just like I had done in some other areas, I went around the perimeter of the nose with some 1mm strips. This is also where I determined I hated my nostrils and I cut out some new ones. Never be afraid to change your mind. Remember, it's just foam. A strip of 10mm foam approximately 3/4 of an inch by 15 inches is going to wrap around the bottom of part P. Now again, this piece may need to change based on the size of your helmet. Part BB is cut out of some 6mm foam. This piece is tacked to either side of the interior. Then once I'm happy with its placement, I can draw a line and glue it into place. I really love the details on this helmet, and the fact that I'm pulling from multiple sources makes me so happy that it's come together this well.
So you all can see the steps that I took to put my particular Ironbreaker helmet together. And again, if you want to make your own, free PDF files can be found over on my website, because I would love to see other people not only make this helmet, but also take those PDFs and customize them and make them your own. Now, if you are building any of my builds or using some HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram, because I want to see your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.